Good morning, Prince of Peace people, and those who are watching the devotion online. Today we have a devotion by request, and you can actually do that. If you know me, you can get me through private email channels or Facebook, as these are cross-posted a variety of places. Know that sometimes I won't be able to do a devotion on whatever you suggest, and if you are someone who knew me from the before time, in the long ago in college, and you make certain suggestions in advance, Ezekiel 23 is out. Y'all can go read that yourselves. So with that, this is Micah 6. We're back in Micah, and we'll have verses 1 through 8, 8 being kind of famous. Listen to what the Lord says. Stand up and plead your case before the mountains. Let the hill hear what you have to say. Hear, O mountains, the Lord's accusations. Listen, you everlasting foundations of the earth. For the Lord has a case against his people. He is lodging a charge against Israel. My people have done. What have I done to you? How have I burdened you? Answer me. I brought you up out of Egypt and redeemed you from the land of slavery. I sent Moses to lead you, also Aaron and Miriam, my people. Remember what Balak, king of Moab, counseled and what Balaam, son of Beor, answered? Remember your journey from Shittim to Gilgal, that you may know the righteous acts of the Lord. With what shall I come before the Lord, and bow down before the exalted God? Shall I come before him with burnt offerings, with calves a year old? Will the Lord be pleased with thousands of rams, with tens of thousands of rivers of oil? Shall I offer my firstborn for my transgressions, the fruit of my body for the sin of my soul? He has showed you, O man, what is good. And what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, and to love mercy, and to walk humbly before your God. So we'll walk through the text because it comes in a few different parts, and then talk about devotional things that you can do with the text. The first part mirrors a lot of divine cases or divine jurisprudence with God. For kind of the best you can go to, I shouldn't say the best, but a prime example comes from Job. The three guys come and talk with Job, and then Elihu comes and talks with Job, and then God answers and says, stand up and gird yourself up like a man, I will question you. And then God has this big discourse. That's what's happening here. In the midst of all this, we have God who set it up. So God's the it's sort of a civil case here. And so there's two complainants, because the subtext for this is the Israelites have been complaining, oh, the law's too hard and we can't ever do it, and what you want is just too difficult. And God is saying, nuh-uh, you guys promised, and how is this hard? And look at all this good stuff that I've given you. So we've got two sides, and if God's not going to be the judge, although he ultimately will be, he's going to use all of creation as the jury. So this is also a common theme, that all of creation kind of stands back in horror as creation watches the blunders of humanity, and especially in the Old Testament, the blunders of an entire nation state that's supposed to be wedded to God. So that's the first section, is the setup for this. So with God lining up creation as the jury, he hasn't done this, and I'll have a very, very quick kind of off-topic or sort of on-topic deal here. Sometimes God changes his name. So it's usually God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the Old Testament, because he wants to talk about the relationship. But sometimes he will preface it by giving you a different title or a different style. That's what you call the list of titles for kings and queens. And so frequently, especially in the minor prophets, although sometimes in the major writing prophets, when God changes his name, he'll change it to the God who created the universe, the God who put the stars in the sky. What's happening there is that God is saying, changing what he thinks people need to know. And that sounds kind of weird, so let me rephrase that a little bit. When he uses relational language, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God who brought you up out of Egypt, that's complaints against the covenant. The only people who are on the hook for this are Israel, because they have the covenant. They have that long relationship with God. If God changes his name to the God of creation, this is a charge against everybody. The idea is any moron on the street should know this. And especially you see this in Amos as he talks about justice. Here in Micah, he's doing much the same thing. He hasn't changed his name, but by setting the hills and the mountains up as the jury, he's saying any reasonable person, not people of the covenant, but any reasonable person should know this and should be able to judge on this, right? And so sometimes you'll get law cases that'll get thrown out because it's too technical, or the judge will just know in advance and say, well, this is just ultimately going to be decided this way because a jury's not going to be able to wade through this, or you'll just keep appealing until you get to the right level of jurisprudence. That's not one of these things. Everything here that he's laying out is that, no, you should have known. Anybody could have known that this is what was supposed to be happening. And verse 8, which we use all the time, reflects back the major complaint. What should you have known? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. So that's section 1. Section 2 is this sort of indictment against Israel of, look all the stuff I did. I kept up my end of the bargain. And remember, in this sense, as God's unwriting the first covenant, and we're going to have a whole time, some other time, or you can PM me about this, but the first covenant gets unwritten, and that unwrites all the promises. This covenant with Moses, the Mosaic covenant. So if that troubles you, again, talk to me later about this in other times, and we can have a longer discussion. He fixes it with Jesus, so don't worry. So this is something that, again, that you don't need to know the nitty-gritty of the covenant of. You just need to be a casual observer and say, yep, God did everything he said he was going to do. Now, what have you guys done? And again, because it's the hills and the mountains, God's complaint is not going to be that you mix shellfish and milk, or that you wore a cotton poly blend for underwear because they were nice and stretchy but wicked the water away. Okay, that's nitty-gritty stuff. This is come on, guys, everyone should know this. So that's what's going on here. And then when we get to verse 6, the speaker switches back to Micah. And Micah's sort of taken aback and is like, oh, no, I don't want to do this. And so in a inspired way, so this isn't just Micah kind of pulling things from random places, Micah says, what do you want? What could possibly appease you? And you see Micah wrestling with the insufficiency of all of the things that we could do. Right? He even brings up his firstborn, and child sacrifice is a real hot button issue for God. This is ultimately what takes the cake for, I should say, for the people of Israel, the northern 10, and they go off in the weeds because of that, among many other things. So you get this little kind of conversation about the insufficiency of the first covenant. It's not going to be, for breaches of justice and mercy, it's not just going to be a bull or 10,000 gallons of oil, streams of oil, right? Something doesn't add up, right? And this all prefigures Christ. And so when we get to verse 6-8, even though it says, he has shown you, O man, or humans, it's actually talking about Jesus here. And we know that because, on the one hand, it's supposed to be something any old moron can do, because we've got the mountains and the hills here as the jury. On the other hand, humans love injustice. Oh, we hate it when it's pointed at us, but we love it when we're the one behind it. And we do this all the time. And we've never actually been able to do this. And as much as I love our wonderful country, and it's the best one out there, and I don't want to live anywhere else, we have problems. And we have justice problems. And on another day, when I'm not wearing my pastor hat, we can talk about those too. So, this is actually for Jesus. prophet, priest, and king, and this is one of those little verses, along with the suffering servant, that tell us what Jesus is going to be like. He has to be the perfect human, not in form and likeness, and as one of my members said, who looks like Sam Elliott, or George Clooney, but someone who acts the way a human always should act. And so this is going to be Jesus. And so Micah 6:8 ends up being this kind of weird verse. And I talked about misappropriation because misappropriation happens all the time. Well, if you just loved mercy and walked humbly with your God, this wouldn't be a problem. Yeah, well, if you weren't a sinner, it wouldn't be either. Now, would it? So, this is sort of the devotional kind of move here, right? This is law. It is flat out law. It's not gospel. It sounds nice, but it's not gospel. It's law. What the Lord requires of you. Instantly, we're into law. So, a few things you can do devotionally with this text. Firstly, you can go back into verse 4 and 5 and go, especially with a study Bible or with Google, hail Google, right? You can go and look up these passages and you can read them devotionally and see what God has done and how God has worked mightily for the Israelites. And you can pray through those things. And you can look and say, what in my life has it been like? Has God moved powerfully and mightily to make that thing happen in my own life? So that's one devotional thing. Another devotional thing that you can do is that you can reflect and pray through the insufficiency of human works, human sacrifices, and the sufficiency and the grace of the sacrifice of Christ. So what that looks like is really doubling down and realizing just how big the grace of Christ really is. Not just what it covers, but how insufficient our work is and how sufficient God's work is. So most people, I think, will probably not want to do either of those and really want to focus on Micah 6:8 because we know it and we've got a little tune and it's going through my head too. If you went to Sunday school in a non-Lutheran place, like I did. Okay, so there's some room for introspection here with justice. Have you been just? And justice is the polar opposite of mercy, which is kind of fun. So justice is everybody getting exactly what they deserve all the time. And in some things, you have to be absolutely just, and we aren't. So there's room here devotionally to contemplate, where have you been unjust? And especially in regard to parenting and in regard to your marriage. Those are our two biggest, especially now while we're in quarantine and lockdown here. Those two are going to be big. When did you make sure that somebody didn't get exactly what they deserved? And I mean that in a good way, right? We always say, well, he'll get what he deserves. But no, people are owed things. And we enter into written, unwritten, spoken, verbal, or just understandings and contracts all the time. I thought you were going to pick up this room. I thought we talked about you not leaving your socks all over the floor. I thought we talked about you cooking dinner every once in a while. Those are things that you deserve. So there's justice. And to pray for forgiveness where we have denied people, usually family members, justice. The next move here would be the same, loving mercy. Now, mercy is the polar opposite of justice. It's when you know what they're going to deserve, and that what them getting what they deserve will absolutely crush them. And so when have we gone ahead and crushed somebody with justice because we could? Again, the usual suspects being the family members or the dog if you don't have family members. Sorry, dog. And then finally, to walk humbly with your God. And humility here is not the same as poor, terrible me. Humility here is knowing what you're good at, what gifts God has given you, and knowing what your liabilities are, what you're bad at, and what your sins are. And to walk with God and to try to limit those liabilities and sins and try to maximize those spiritual gifts. And if that sounds corporate-y, it is. I don't have a great way to do that, to talk about it in this short little time period, but to pray through and look for opportunities and say, I'm really good at this. And how can I use my really good at this to make life better for everybody? Because God has, in a godly way, because God has given me these skills and talents and abilities. And to pray through those, and then not just to pray through, but then to go and do it. So maybe this wasn't the Micah 6:8 you wanted, or maybe, it's a completely different take and you'll just write me off. So there's always that too. Hopefully you do the prayer part, or there's in some way enrichment from this. So God's blessings to you. Have a wonderful day in the Lord, and we will see you back here next time.